This exercise is a continuation of the previous one. We still want to read 4 values that are unique integers from the user, and we still want to display a statement that says what are the comparison between the values, except that this time, instead of having like 3 different printf, like a printf here or here, one of the two, okay, that's going to tell us about A and B, and then another printf, one of the two here, that's going to tell us between B and C, and finally a separate printf, one of the two here, that's going to tell us between C and D. We want to switch to a form of code where we are going to have like one printf that says A is lesser than B is lesser than C lesser than D, or another printf that says A is lesser than B lesser than C but greater than D, or another printf. So you get the idea, right? The idea is that we're going to display on one line with one printf, we're going to display all the relation between the variables. How many of those printfs is there going to be in the code? Well, there's going to be one such printf for every possible combination of relation between the variable. So A can be lesser than B, lesser than C, lesser than D. That's the first one. Then A could be greater than B, and then B lesser than C, lesser than D. This is the idea. So this is time to use both what you learn about programming and nesting if-else statement, because that's the object of this exercise. It's going to have you write the code, but instead of using serially arranged if statement, one after the other that are independent, we are going to nest if statement, if-else statement inside one another to get to that result. And that's going to be also a review of what you learn in discrete mathematics, discrete structure, where you have been doing some combination work. Well, here we want to explore all possible combinations. So how many of them are there? I'll let you figure it out, okay? So good time to pause the video right now. Before you do, for one more thing I almost forgot, the tests are given to you. So I guess I gave you the answer to how many combinations already are done. Okay, anyway, but the tests are given to you, and they show you that we are testing indeed all possible combination here of relation between A, B, C, and D. Okay, assuming they cannot be equal to one another, that would make the scope of this program expand quite considerably. Okay. But you are given a test on this. You are given a series of tests that you can use to make sure that your code is actually implementing the requirement successfully. Give it a try. Pause the video, give it a try, and I'll see you back in a little bit. All right. So that was a little bit, by the way. So a little bit later, we're back, and what we're going to do now is we're going to take a stab at this ourselves, okay? We're going to try to solve it. So let's go back to the code here. First thing I need to do is I need to figure out what kind of printf I'm going to use, okay? So let's start fresh. Printf. I want to display something such as A with the value between parentheses is lesser than B with the value in parentheses is lesser than C with the value again is lesser than D. So that would be one of the messages that we could display. Okay, \n, and then A, B, C, D are the variables that I want to use to fill those blanks. So that's what I want to display. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of the old stuff. Out with the old, in with the new, save that, gcc main.c. Ooh, I forgot something here. All right, oh, there's a ton of it too. Wow, what's happening? Function main, warning, missing terminating. I didn't close a string literal correctly. This is what I did here. So this is it. I was wondering about the color of this A, B, C, D, but yep, didn't pay attention enough here. So save that. So a bunch of errors, right? But once we solve the one error that was causing all of this, see, they all go away. Pretty cool. A.out here. Value of A is 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not going to do anything anyway, right? I can just verify that the A, the 2, the B, the C, the D are 1, 2, 3, 4 indeed. The value of comparisons are completely worthless because I didn't actually do any test to see if A was indeed lesser than B, lesser than C, lesser than D. Okay. So now now I want to get to that structure. So again, if you were stuck, you didn't know where to start, hopefully now it's a little clearer. You can pause the video, try to continue on your own. Okay, you can do that in all of those videos without me mentioning it explicitly, but here it's a particularly good point to say, okay, now I understand better what he wants me to do. Let's give it another shot. And if you're back, or if you didn't leave, we're going to now try to add the structure of if-else statement that's going to allow us to display all the possible relation between those variables. So let's start with if a lesser than b. Okay, if we know that a is lesser than b, and that would be lowercase a here, if we know that a is lesser than b, then that part of my printf is correct. What about that part? Well, for that part to be correct, I need to know that a is lesser than b and b is lesser than c. So there are two ways you could write this. You could write this using logical, logical and logical or. I'm going to ask you not to do it, because the whole point of the exercise is to make sure that all of you are comfortable with if-else statement and are comfortable with nesting if-else statement inside one another as much as required by a program, right? So it's really a drill practice here. So I don't want you to use the logical operators yet. We'll have plenty of opportunity to use them in exercise. But what I want you to do is I want you to use simple condition in your if-else and just nest a bunch of if-else statement. So here I'm going to say if a is lesser than b, then if b is lesser than c, then if c is lesser than d, then only I can say this. Okay, I can do that printf, and I'm going to make this a little wider. There we go. So at that point, only if I pass this condition, I pass this condition, I pass this condition, all of three of them are true, then I can display that. Else, and that else corresponds to this if statement here, right? So if I reach the point of the code here that is inside this else, what do I know? Well, I know that the first condition at the top, a lesser than b, was true. The second condition was true as well, otherwise I would not end up here. And the third one, c lesser than d, was false. So I'm just going to apply that change to my output. C is now greater than d, okay? And that's the ID. Again, if you didn't have a clue where to go and now you can see a little of the structure, pause. Try to complete the next step on your own. This if as an else, this if, and that if here are going to need their else statement. So give it a shot. Going back to the code together. So what do I want to do in that else here? So make sure that you do correct indentation, otherwise it's going to be horrible to read your code and to work with it also for yourself, okay? So if I have an else statement here, I'm going to cut and paste what I did with that if, because that if that I cut and paste is the one that checks C and D and changes, C and D here. But now, in order for me to reach this part of the code, I had to have B lesser than C true. If B lesser than C is false, I reach this part of the code here. So I need to adjust my display statement accordingly. B and C is not B lesser than C, it's B greater than C. There we go. And then the logic of saying if C lesser than D, well, change this. If C is not lesser than D, then don't change it, is still valid. Okay? So another one of those, there's a lot of breakpoints between air quotes here. There's a lot of opportunity for you to pause this video definitely in this exercise. Okay, so do so again and try to finish up the else for this part of the code. Else for this part of the code, the ID is the same. The ID is that I'm going to fetch all of this. Okay, here we are. All of it. And then paste it here. So now what I know is that those if else that are inside this block of code here that I'm going to highlight in a second, this block of code here, those if-else are correctly managing, the fact that C is lesser or greater than D, or that B is lesser or greater than C. But what I added is that if I end up in this else statement, this is because this condition over here, A lesser than B, is false. So I can assume that A is greater than B, right? So I'm going to adjust my display accordingly. For all of those cases, A is greater than B. So it's a matter of understanding how to read code with a bunch of nested if-else statements. We kind of pushed a little the envelope. We went 3 levels of nesting, but 3 levels of nesting is actually reasonable in most cases. So this is pretty much what you have to set your expectation for this course, okay? You should be able by now, after taking your introduction to programming before to take this class, by now you should be able to nest 3 levels of if-else statement comfortably, okay? Or if you're not really comfortable, don't give up. Just keep doing it. Keep doing this kind of exercise. Okay, come to office hour, we'll come up with exercise for you to do until you are comfortable doing it. That's the key to acquiring a new skill, right? So I have here all those statements, all those printf. I'm going to save the file. Hopefully I didn't make a typo early on that I cut and paste through the entire code, because that's the kind of nightmare scenario with cut and paste oriented programming. Now I'm going to run my code, and I'm going to run it 8 times. Okay, so I might not do all 8 times on the video because that doesn't have like much value for you. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to follow this test, make sure it displays this, then this test, make sure it displays this, and so on, so forth. So the first test, 1, 2, 3, 4, let's give it a whirl. 1, 2, 3, 4, here we go, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it tells me A, value 1 is lesser than B, value 2 lesser than 3, value 3 lesser than D, value 4. So this is working. First test, success. And then we move on to the next test. 2, 1, 3, 4. All right, here we are. There we go. Run the code. 2, 1, 3, 4. So 2 is greater than 1. So far, so good. 1 is lesser than 3. 3 is lesser than 4. So far, so good. So those 2 tests are passing. So I only did 2 tests right now. What I want you to do is I want you to go through the entire list to make sure that your code is indeed working. And it's really important. Designing this test table is a part of programming by itself, okay? For now, we give you those kind of tests simply because you are still at the very early stages of learning how to program. So it's a way for me to give you a way of reading the requirement that is not, based on natural language, plain English, description that sometimes are ambiguous. This is really formal, right? This means if you pass all of those tests, your code should be compliant with the requirements that I expressed, for example, with just a few sentences at the beginning and an example in the first tab here of OneNote, okay? So the idea is both the requirement and the test together give you a good goal to shoot for in terms of what your program should be able to do. And then you just have to develop actually the solution that will fit those requirements. All right. With this, we're going to wrap it up with this video. There's one more video coming up on this exercise where we're going to add like a last little twist to make sure that you practice all of those conditional operators. Okay? Thank you for your attention, as always.